Petrophysics Daily, your daily petrophysics guide. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here and really excited for this one.
Yeah, so whether you are, prepping for a highly technical subsurface geology meeting later this afternoon, or you are simply intensely curious about what exactly lies miles beneath the Earth's surface, our mission today is to give you a clear, practical guide.
Right, because, let's be real. It's a critical subject. The subsurface is it's completely unforgiving.
Totally.
We are essentially trying to solve a three-dimensional puzzle in the dark, miles underground, where the cost of being wrong is, well, it's astronomical.
It really is. And that is exactly why we are diving into issue 004 of a carousel titled A Field Guide to the Subsurface.
That's a great resource.
It is. And the focus today is porosity and permeability as first principles. It is a really concise guide prepared for manual technical review, and the foundation of it is built squarely on Chapter 1 of the textbook Petrophysics, published by Elsevier in 2016.
Which is honestly the perfect starting point. Chapter 1, first principles. You really cannot build a solid understanding of the subsurface without mastering these fundamental concepts.
Because everything else builds on it, right?
Exactly. Everything else, logs, seismic data, reservoir simulation, it all rests entirely on how well you understand the physical rock.
Okay, so imagine this scenario for a second. You spend $100 million drilling a deep water well. You run your tools down the hole, and the data says you have hit a massive zone of storage space. The rock is basically a sponge.
You're thinking you've hit the jackpot.
Right. You think you are rich. But when you actually try to produce it, when you open the valves, you can't extract a single drop of oil. The fluid it refuses to move.
It's a nightmare scenario.
So today we are looking at the billion-dollar difference between storage and flow, and why relying on a single isolated number to understand a rock is basically the deadliest trap in petrophysics.
And, that $100 million dry hole, it happens way more often than people outside the industry realize.
Oh, I bet.
And almost every single time, the root cause traces back to a misunderstanding of the fundamental vocabulary we are looking at today, which is porosity and permeability.
Right.
The source explicitly notes these must be introduced early, but with a strict caveat, like they should never be interpreted without context.
And there's a defining quote from the guide that basically anchors this whole discussion. It says, storage and flow are related but not identical.
It sounds so simple, right?
Yeah, almost too simple.
But conflating those two things is exactly where the technical errors begin. Porosity describes the pore volume available for storage. It is just the percentage of empty space within the solid rock framework.
Okay, just the empty space.
Exactly. Permeability, on the other hand, describes the connected pathways for flow. It is the measure of how easily a fluid can transmit through that rock.
Let me establish a quick baseline analogy here, because when I read that porosity is storage and permeability is the connected pathway, my mind immediately went to a massive football stadium parking lot.
Oh, I like that.
Right. So porosity is the parking lot itself, just the sheer volume of empty spaces. You could have a mega stadium with 50,000 parking spaces. That is massive porosity.
Right. The rock has a high volume of empty pore space between its grains, but, and this is key, a high volume of empty space doesn't inherently mean things can actually move.
Exactly. Permeability is the infrastructure. It is the width of the exit gates and the size of the roads connecting those parking spaces to the highway.
Right.
You can have that incredible massive porosity, 50,000 spaces. But if the exit gates are locked, or if there's only one tiny single-lane dirt road out of the lot, you basically have zero permeability. The cars are stored, but nothing is flowing out.
That's spot on. And we have to push that analogy further by introducing the fluid itself, because in the physical rock, the type of fluid dictates the flow just as much as the pathways do.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, imagine you have a wide-open exit gate, but instead of sports cars, every vehicle in the lot is a massive, sluggish tank moving through thick mud. Your flow rate drops to zero anyway, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
In petrophysics, if those pores are filled with low-viscosity natural gas, it will flow beautifully through even microscopic pathways. But if those exact same pores and pathways are filled with heavy, viscous crude oil, it might not budge an inch.
So the mechanics of the fluid and the mechanics of the rock architecture are just constantly interacting. You could have a tiny parking lot with only 10 spaces, but it opens directly onto a 10-lane superhighway. Low porosity, but incredible permeability.
Precisely. And this is why the source material insists that the interpretation is always stronger when these controls are reviewed together rather than in isolation.
You have to look at the whole picture.
Exactly. If you evaluate the storage capacity without looking at the pathways or the pathways without knowing the fluid properties, you simply do not understand the rock's actual behavior.
So if a single disconnected pathway, or like you said, a viscous fluid, can ruin an entire reservoir's output, it is really easy to see why we need a rigorous methodology to evaluate them. We can't just guess.
No, definitely not.
And the carousel outlines a very specific practical review path for this.
Yes, the guide gives us 4 interpretation controls to keep an interpretation traceable and grounded in actual physical reality.
When you are actually doing this in the field, the guide visualizes this as a sequence, almost like an interpretation funnel. You start with porosity, and it lists a confidence or weighting factor of 92%.
Right, a very high confidence to start.
Then you move down to permeability at 84%, connectivity at 76%, and finally context at 68%.
And that descending percentage is just a fantastic way to illustrate the compounding uncertainty of subsurface interpretation. It is basically a confidence cascade.
A confidence cascade, I like that.
When you evaluate just the porosity, the bulk empty space, your tools are fairly direct. You can be highly confident, say 92% in that measurement. But as you add constraints to determine if the rock will actually produce, your absolute certainty drops.
Because measuring the actual flow pathways, the permeability, is inherently way more complex than just measuring empty space. So your confidence drops to 84%.
Exactly. And the sequence the guide outlines forces you to respect that uncertainty. It dictates 3 distinct steps. Step 1, use the porosity control as the first applied check. Establish the storage first.
Right.
Step 2, review permeability and connectivity together to avoid a single-factor conclusion. And step 3, state how context changes the interpretation or uncertainty.
Okay, wait. I'm stuck on step 2. If permeability is the pathway for flow and connectivity is, well, the connected pathway for flow, why are these 2 separate checks in the sequence? They honestly sound like the exact same thing to me.
That's a great question, and it's a critical nuance that trips up a lot of interpretations. Permeability is often a localized measurement.
Localized.
Yeah, imagine we take a core sample from a cylindrical piece of rock, maybe a few inches long. We take it up to the lab, we force fluid through it, and we measure its permeability. It tells us that within those few inches, pathways exist. That is local permeability.
Okay, so the local sample has flow.
Right, but connectivity is about the macroscopic reservoir scale network.
The big picture.
Let's say you are evaluating a vuggy carbonate rock, a rock full of large irregular holes called vugs. Your small core sample might happen to contain a perfectly connected pathway between 2 vugs, high local permeability.
But on a larger scale.
On a larger scale, within the reservoir miles underground, those vugs might just be isolated clusters, like a wide road that runs for 2 blocks and then just hits a dead end.
Oh, so the cars can move around locally really well, but they can't actually leave the stadium complex.
Exactly. While permeability describes the ability to flow through a specific medium, connectivity emphasizes that those pores must be continuously linked across the entire system you are evaluating.
That makes so much sense.
The source explicitly tells us to review them together to specifically prevent a single-factor conclusion. If you just look at that one localized permeability measurement, you might conclude the whole reservoir flows. But if the network isn't connected on a macro scale, your conclusion is completely flawed.
Which brings us directly to what the source calls the common trap. Because connectivity on a macro scale is so elusive and, difficult to perfectly map, it seems like human nature just defaults to the easiest metric available.
Oh, absolutely. The single number trap. We constantly want to distill the chaos of geology into a simple grade.
Right.
We want to say, hey, this rock has 20% porosity, therefore it is a good rock. It is comforting to have a definitive binary answer to present to the engineering team.
But the guide strictly warns against this. It literally says, do not let one number carry the interpretation.
Never.
You must check the conclusion against the controlling evidence before publishing it. A technical claim has to remain limited strictly to what the evidence supports. It is a bit like judging a patient's entire physical health based solely on their resting heart rate.
That's a really good way to put it, right? If you tell a doctor your resting heart rate is 60 beats per minute, that is a great single number. But that number is totally meaningless if you are simultaneously suffering from severe dehydration and a massive infection. In the subsurface, knowing you have 20% porosity is meaningless if you don't evaluate the triad mentioned in the source material. Rock grains, pore space, and fluid.
Let's break that triad down because this is where the mechanics really come together. Rock grains, pore space, and fluid. How do the grains themselves change the interpretation if the pore space is exactly the same?
Let's compare a sandstone to a shale. Sandstone is primarily made of quartz grains, which are relatively large and rounded. When you stack them together, the pore spaces between them are also relatively large. A fluid can move through them really easily.
Makes sense.
Shale, however, is made of clay minerals, and clay particles are microscopic, flat, and plate-like.
So they pack together much tighter.
They do, but here is the really fascinating part. A shale can actually have the exact same porosity, the same total percentage of empty space as a sandstone.
Wait, really?
Yeah, but because the clay particles are so incredibly tiny, the individual pore spaces between them are microscopic. Furthermore, clay minerals often carry a slight electrical charge.
Oh, wow.
And that charge binds a thin layer of water directly to the surface of the grains. This is called irreducible water saturation.
So the water is physically stuck to the walls of the pores like a magnet.
Exactly. So if you have a shale with 20% porosity, almost all of that 20% is taken up by water that is electromagnetically glued to the microscopic clay grains. The permeability is functionally zero.
The pathways are basically choked off.
Yep. The connected pathways are choked off by the bound water, but if you have a sandstone with 20% porosity, the grains are large, the pores are large, and the fluid is free to flow.
That perfectly illustrates why a single number is so dangerous. I mean, a single instrument reading 20% porosity gives you zero information about whether you are dealing with large, flowing quartz pores or microscopic choked-off clay pores.
Which is why your conclusion must be connected to the physical reality of the rock. What are the grains made of? What is the fluid? A technical claim stripped of that context is not just useless, it is an actual liability.
So if we can't trust an isolated number, we clearly need multiple lines of evidence to build that context. The obvious next question for you listening is, where does this diverse evidence actually come from? We're talking about rocks that are 2 miles underground.
Right. And the guide addresses this by introducing the concept of two windows into the subsurface: direct evidence and interpreted evidence.
Direct evidence makes sense. It is the core sample we talked about earlier. You drill a hollow bit, bring a cylinder, the actual rock to the surface, and put it on a laboratory table.
Exactly.
You can physically touch it, push fluids through it, and directly measure its porosity and permeability.
But as you pointed out, we cannot core the entire Earth. Coring is incredibly expensive, and it's slow. Most of a well bore is drilled without taking physical rock samples, which means we have to rely heavily on the second window, interpreted evidence.
And the source lists core and lab measurements, but then relies on well logs and integrated interpretation as the primary supporting evidence.
Yeah.
The graphic in the guide highlights 5 specific acronyms for these logs. I love this part. It's GR, RES, DEN-N, NPHI, and SUN.
And this is where the discipline of petrophysics becomes such an elegant form of engineering. We are using these wireline logging tools, lowering sophisticated instruments down a hole on a wire to measure various physical properties of the formation.
And then you work backward.
Exactly. From those remote measurements, we back-calculate the rock and fluid properties.
Let's actually unpack these logs because they aren't just squiggly lines on a chart. They represent totally different physics. The first one is GR, or gamma ray.
Yeah.
How does a gamma ray log tell us anything about porosity or flow?
Well, the gamma ray tool doesn't actually measure porosity at all. It measures natural radioactivity.
Okay.
Certain elements in the Earth's crust, like potassium, uranium, and thorium, are naturally radioactive, and those elements tend to concentrate in clay minerals, not in clean quartz sand.
Ah. So the gamma ray log is how you tell the difference between the sandstone and the shale we were just talking about.
Precisely. A high gamma ray reading tells you the rock is rich in clay. It's a shale. A low gamma ray reading suggests a clean sandstone or carbonate. It doesn't give you a porosity number, but it immediately gives you the geological context for the porosity you might measure with other tools.
Which brings us to RES, the resistivity log. I'm assuming this involves electricity.
Yes, the tool emits electrical currents into the rock and measures how much the formation resists that current. The rock grains themselves generally act as insulators. The electricity flows through the fluids in the pore space.
So this is how we figure out what kind of fluid is in the parking lot.
Exactly. Formation water deep underground is usually very salty, and salt water is a great conductor of electricity.
Right.
So if the pores are filled with salt water, the resistivity is very low. But hydrocarbons, oil, and natural gas are insulators. They do not conduct electricity.
Oh, wow.
So if you have a zone with high porosity and suddenly the resistivity shoots up, it tells you the pores are likely filled with oil or gas rather than water.
That is brilliant. You are using electricity to hunt for the insulating fluids. But we still need to know how much storage space there actually is. The next two logs on the sources list are DEN and NPHI, density and neutron porosity.
These are your primary porosity tools, and they are usually run together. The density log uses a gamma ray source to bombard the rock and measures the electron density, which correlates directly to the bulk density of the rock.
Okay, so it weighs it, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. If you know the density of solid quartz, and the tool reads a bulk density that is significantly lighter than solid quartz, the difference has to be the lighter fluid-filled pore space.
So a lighter overall rock means more empty space, more porosity. What about the neutron log?
The neutron porosity log works differently. It shoots high-energy neutrons into the formation. These neutrons bounce around and lose energy most effectively when they collide with hydrogen atoms.
Why hydrogen?
Because a hydrogen nucleus has almost the exact same mass as a neutron.
Oh, like billiard balls hitting each other.
Exactly. So the tool is essentially a hydrogen detector. Since both water and oil are packed with hydrogen, a high hydrogen index indicates a high volume of fluid, which translates to high porosity.
Okay, I follow that.
But here's where interpreting them together is so vital. What happens if the pore space is filled with natural gas instead of oil or water?
Well, gas is much less dense. It has way fewer hydrogen atoms per cubic centimeter than liquid water or oil.
Yes. So the neutron log looks at the gas and says, there isn't much hydrogen here. The porosity must be very low. But the density log looks at the exact same gas and says, this formation is incredibly light. The porosity must be massively high.
The two tools completely disagree with each other.
And that disagreement is exactly what petrophysicists look for. When the density porosity reads artificially high and the neutron porosity reads artificially low, they cross over each other on the log plot.
The crossover.
Yes, that crossover is the classic, definitive signature of natural gas. If you looked at either log in isolation as a single number, you would be completely wrong about the rock. But by interpreting them together, they reveal the presence of gas.
It is a layered puzzle. You are layering natural radiation, electrical resistance, bulk density, and neutron collisions to paint a picture of a physical rock structure you can't even see. And there's one more on the list. SON, the sonic log.
The sonic log measures the travel time of high-frequency sound waves through the rock. Sound travels faster through solid rock than it does through fluid-filled pores.
Okay.
So a longer travel time indicates more porosity. But crucially, sound waves tend to take the fastest path, bypassing those large, isolated, disconnected vugs we talked about earlier.
Wait, really? So a sonic log might only measure the well-connected porosity, whereas the density log measures the total bulk porosity, including the disconnected holes.
Exactly. By comparing the density porosity to the sonic porosity, you can start to quantify connectivity. You can actually see the difference between local storage and macro-level flow pathways just by comparing how radiation and sound travel through the exact same depth of rock.
Which brings us full circle back to the interpretation sequence, that layered picture we just built, combining gamma ray, resistivity, density, neutron, and sonic logs. That is the final step. That is the context sitting at the bottom of the funnel at 68%.
Context is the ultimate filter. It is the synthesis of every log, every core sample, and every physical principle. It dictates what the interpretation can and cannot actually claim.
Right.
You start with a 92% confidence that you've identified some empty pore space, but by the time you've filtered that through the realities of permeability, the macroconnectivity of the reservoir, the effects of irreducible bound water in clays, and the physics of the wireline tools themselves, your absolute confidence in predicting a commercial flowing well drops to 68%.
You've narrowed down the uncertainty to a manageable, actionable window. So what does this all mean for you as you close out this deep dive? The carousel leaves us with a profound, fundamental takeaway. Understand the rock. Interpret the data.
It is the perfect synthesis of everything we've discussed. Storage and flow are related but fundamentally not identical.
Yeah.
The point of petrophysics is not to memorize an isolated statement or a single percentage from a textbook. The point is to connect the core concepts to the physical evidence and the interpretation context.
It is not about finding one magic number that solves the puzzle. It is about using porosity, permeability, connectivity, and context together. It is about actively rejecting the single number trap by using that disciplined, cascaded sequence to traceably back up your claims, using both the direct physical evidence of the core and the interpreted layered evidence of the well logs.
And if we step back and look at the broader implications, I really want to leave you with this thought. We are entering an era of immense subsurface engineering challenges that go far beyond just extracting hydrocarbons. Think about initiatives like carbon capture and storage, where we are actively trying to inject liquefied CO2 deep underground and trap it there permanently.
Oh.
We are relying on these exact same physical principles, the capillary pressure, the bound water, the irreducible flow pathways, to ensure that fluid never escapes.
Right.
If the physical rock tells a story that requires such strict, disciplined context and diverse evidence to read accurately just to understand what is naturally there, how much of our future success in engineering the subsurface will rely on our ability to not just read the data, but to truly deeply understand the limitations and uncertainties of our own interpretations?
That is a staggering and fascinating question to ponder. You can't just force a single number on the Earth and expect it to behave. You have to read the whole story. Thanks for listening to Petrophysics Daily. See you in the next chapter.